On the vast and legendary Mount Olympus, where the ancient gods observed the fate of mortals, a story of power, betrayal, and redemption is about to be told. Zeus, the all-powerful god of thunder, will face not only external enemies, but also threats from within his own realm. The age of the ultimate gods has never been more fragile, and the battle to maintain the balance between Olympus and the universe will be epic. If you're a fan of mythology and love epic narratives full of action, mystery, and twists, subscribe to the channel now and don't miss out on any amazing stories like this. Get ready to immerse yourself in the legends of the gods. The icy wind blew across the peaks of Mount Olympus, where the gods watched the mortal world with an indifferent gaze, while their own internal conflicts boiled like lava beneath a volcano. At the center of it all, seated on a throne of gold and marble, was Zeus, the all-powerful god of lightning. His presence dominated the room, with eyes that seemed to contain the fury of an eternal storm and hands that could summon lightning bolts of pure divine energy. Despite his serene appearance, something deeper was bothering him, a growing threat not from without, but from within Olympus itself. The story of Zeus began in dramatic fashion. He was not born into power. Heaven and earth were still ruled by Kronos, the Titan devouring his own children. Cronus, fearing a prophecy that one of his sons would dethrone him, swallowed everyone born to his wife, Rhea. But when Zeus was born, Rhea made the decision that would change the course of history forever. She tricked Kronos, replacing the baby Zeus with a stone, wrapped in cloths. Zeus was taken in secret to be raised away from his father's fury, and there in the mountains he grew strong, learning about his destiny. As an adult, Zeus was conscious of his mission, to free his brothers and sisters from the stomach of Kronos and seize the throne of heaven. With the help of Metis, a Titan and her ally, Zeus made Cronus ingest a potion that forced him to vomit up his children, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Together, the brothers reunited, forming an invincible force. But the battle against Cronus and the other Titans would not be easy. The Titan War, as it was known, lasted a decade, and the mountains of the earth shook with the weight of destruction. Zeus was a merciless warrior. Its lightning flashed across the sky, exploding into creations of pure energy. Over time, he and his brothers gained the upper hand. Poseidon, with his trident, summoned gigantic waves to swallow the Titans, while Hades manipulated the shadows and secrets of the underworld to spread chaos. The battlefield was a landscape of desolation, where mountains were destroyed and oceans boiled. At the end of the war, Zeus struck the final blow, casting Cronus and the other Titans into the depths of Tartarus, the bottomless abyss. Zeus, now crowned as the king of the gods, took Olympus as his throne. Greece prospered under his rule. Mortals erected temples in his honor, and the gods, at least at first glance, lived in harmony. But absolute power is a dangerous thing. Zeus soon found himself surrounded by tensions and betrayals within Olympus. Hera, his wife, was a strong-willed force and fervent jealousy. She was always suspicious of Zeus, mainly because of his romantic escapades with mortals and other goddesses. This was the weakness of the great god of thunder, his insatiable need to engage with others. Each time this happened, Hera's anger grew larger. The relationship between Zeus and Hera was a tightrope of tensions. As much as they were the supreme rulers, their fights were constant, and Olympus felt the impact. While Zeus tried to maintain his reign with justice, at least in his eyes, Hera plotted in the shadows, trying to weaken him, perhaps even dethrone him. Distrust was increasing. The fights became public, causing embarrassment to the other gods. Meanwhile, an even greater threat was brewing in the underworld. The Titans, led by Kronos, still trapped in Tartarus, were beginning to find a way to escape. They were unwilling to accept their defeat so easily, and as time went on, Kronos' hatred only grew. He wanted his revenge against Zeus and the gods of Olympus, a mysterious force of the universe, an entity older than time itself, began to whisper in the ears of the prisoners of Tartarus, promising liberation. And Zeus, focused on his internal conflicts, was oblivious to this imminent threat. Zeus' fury was something feared by mortals and gods alike. When he learned of a growing betrayal among his own, his anger was unleashed. Lightning lit up Olympus and the deadly sky. His power was beyond anything the gods could bear, but his frequent use of that power was beginning to come at a cost. The unbridled use of his fury created cracks in reality. Nature itself began to fragment. Unpredictable storms swept through Greece, floods came out of nowhere, and earthquakes rocked cities. But Zeus, even though he was the most powerful, knew that he could not reign by force alone. Wisdom began to seep into his thoughts. He needed to find a way to balance justice and power to bring gods and mortals to peace. The problem was that the harder he tried, the more it seemed that harmony slipped through his fingers. His enemies, both gods and those who dwelt in the underworld, were increasingly united. What Zeus did not yet know was that Kronos was about to return. An alliance between the ancient forces of nature and the revenge of the Titans was beginning to take shape. The war that Zeus had won earlier was about to start again. But this time, Olympus itself was in danger of being destroyed. The pressure on Zeus increased. The weight of ruling Olympus and maintaining order in the universe was increasingly difficult to bear. His erstwhile allies, his brothers and sisters, now grew apart, each with their own interests and agendas. Poseidon had retreated to the depths of his oceans, more concerned with the underwater world than with the conflicts of Olympus. Hades, always gloomy, isolated himself in his domain in the underworld, keeping a watchful but distant eye on the events. And Hera, always present, no longer disguised her intentions. His eyes reflected a suppressed fury, resentment growing like a flame about to explode. But what no one, not even the gods, realized was that Olympus was beginning to weaken, and this was directly linked to Zeus's emotional instability. Mortals who had once worshipped the king of the gods with unwavering devotion were beginning to feel the consequences of divine wrath. Crops failed, unexpected storms destroyed entire villages, and the seas became treacherous. The prayers of mortals who had once ascended to heaven with gratitude were now laden with fear and despair. In the shadows of Olympus, ancient forces, which had been suppressed for millennia, sensed the weakness of Zeus. These forces belonged to Tartarus itself, the deepest abyss in the universe, where the Titans awaited. Kronos, ever on the lookout, felt the cracks in reality, an opening for the revenge he longed for. He began to gather forces, calling in old allies and corrupting creatures from nightmares that dwelt in the depths. Meanwhile, Hera hatched her own plans. His distrust and jealousy fueled a latent anger. To her, Zeus was no longer the glorious god who had fought valiantly to free the gods from the yoke of the Titans. He had become arrogant, distant, and his constant infidelity to mortals and other deities made the goddess feel more and more humiliated. Although he never openly admitted it, the desire to see Zeus fall was deeply rooted in his heart. Hera secretly sought the help of Hephaestus, the god of forges, and his son. Hephaestus, though loyal to Olympus, had his own unresolved issues with Zeus. He had been thrown from the top of Olympus by his father because he was considered deformed. Resentment still burned within him, and when his mother came to him in search of an alliance, Hephaestus did not refuse. Together, mother and son began to forge a plan, something that could trap Zeus, neutralize his power, and perhaps dethrone him. Hera's plot involved more than just Hephaestus. She also sought out Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. Athena, a favorite daughter of Zeus, viewed her father's flaws with critical eyes. She knew that Zeus's constant wrath was leading Olympus to collapse, and, even reluctantly, she began to wonder if perhaps it was time for new leadership to emerge. Hera planted the seed of doubt in Athena, suggesting that her daughter's wisdom could guide Olympus into a new era, an era without the unpredictable tyranny of Zeus. While conspiracies grew within Olympus, Zeus remained oblivious to the danger that was brewing around him. He was more focused on what came from the underworld. Lightning sliced across the sky more often, not as a response to the gods' dissatisfaction, but as a reflection of Zeus's anxiety. Something was wrong. He could feel it. The very air seemed laden with gloomy omens, and the ground shook strangely, as if something was about to emerge from the depths. One night, when Zeus was alone on a mountaintop, observing the mortal world, he had a vision. A colossal shadow, larger than any living thing, rose from the depths of Tartarus, a creature he recognized at once: Kronos. The Titan had managed to escape, and his eyes shone with an ancient, unstoppable fury. Zeus woke up with a start, his heart beating like thunder inside his chest. It was not an ordinary sight, it was a premonition. Zeus immediately convened a council of the gods, bringing together the greatest of Olympus, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Athena, and others. He announced that Kronos was back and that a new war was about to begin. However, what Zeus didn't realize was that the meeting itself was steeped in tension. His allies were no longer the same. Hades seemed interested but distant, while Poseidon was more concerned with his waters. Athena, who always offered wise advice, was strangely silent. And Hera watched everything with an almost disturbing calm. As Zeus tried to organize a defense against the Titans, he barely noticed the chasm that opened beneath his feet. Every plan he hatched was met with veiled resistance, suggestions from his brothers and allies that seemed more like sabotage than support. He felt frustration growing inside him. It was as if Olympus itself was turning against him. The fall of Zeus began to take shape slowly but inexorably. His confidence, once unshakable, was now corrupted by doubts. He isolated himself more and more in his own thoughts, tormented by the idea that he might no longer be fit to rule Olympus. The prophecy he so dreaded, that the power of the gods would be overthrown, began to seem like an inevitable reality. In the underworld, Kronos, now free, gathered his former allies, Titans, and other primordial monsters. He knew that Zeus's weakness lay in his arrogance, and that weakness was what he would use to destroy him. Kronos, with his power restored, began to break down the boundaries between the underworld and the mortal world. Terrible catastrophes began to occur. Fissures opened in the earth, and gigantic creatures forgotten by the ages emerged to spread destruction. Chaos reigned, and mortals cried out for help, while the cities were reduced to rubble. Zeus, however, was divided. He knew he would need to face Kronos again, but he also knew something was wrong between the gods. He felt the conspiracies and betrayals around him, and it infuriated him. It was an anger he couldn't control. Even so, he began to prepare for battle, gathering his weapons and his forces. What Zeus didn't know was that the final battle wouldn't just be against Kronos. The real confrontation would come from where he least expected it, from the heart of Olympus, from those he believed to be his closest allies. Zeus's fate was sealed, but how he would face that fate was yet to be decided. The days leading up to Kronos' return were marked by increasing tension on Olympus and on Earth. Calamities continued to spread, and mortals began to question divine protection. Temples to Zeus, once filled with offerings and prayers, were now frequented by few. The cities, devastated by earthquakes and storms, no longer trusted the gods. It was as if the world itself was on the verge of collapse. Zeus became a solitary figure, a king surrounded by doubts, while the forces of the universe conspired against him. But Zeus, at his core, was not someone who surrendered easily. His anger, which had previously seemed uncontrollable, was now beginning to be directed. He understood that the battle with Kronos would be decisive, but at the same time, he knew that Olympus was on the verge of an internal revolt. To win, he would need to restore his authority while also dealing with the traitors around him. His eyes scanned the pantheon of gods, and he wondered, who was still loyal? Who would be by your side when the storm finally came? In the dead of night, while the gods of Olympus slept, Hera met with Hephaestus in secret. Deep in the volcanic caves where the god of forge worked, they plotted the final blow. The plan was in motion. Hephaestus had set a special trap, a golden throne of incredible beauty, apparently offered as a gift of reconciliation to Zeus. But the throne was more than it seemed. Once seated on it, the king of the gods would be imprisoned, his strength drained, making him vulnerable and possibly unable to use his divine power. Hephaestus, even reluctantly, believed that Zeus's reign was nearing its end. And while his motivations were influenced by past resentments, he also had a burning desire to see a new divine order emerge, one that he believed was more just, and one where he could play a more important role. Hera, in turn, saw everything as an opportunity to regain control. She would be the undisputed queen, the one who would rule alongside a newly chosen leader, perhaps Athena, perhaps even herself. Meanwhile, Zeus continued his search for true allies. He decided to take a solitary trip to the underworld to confront Hades, hoping to secure his help in the war to come. Traverse the dark lands of the realm of the dead had always been a challenge, but Zeus, armed with his thunderbolt and determination, was prepared to face any danger that arose. Upon arrival, he was greeted by Charon, the ferryman of the river Styx, who took him directly to the gates of Hades' palace. Hades, the god of the underworld, watched his brother's arrival with interest. There was something sinister in his eyes, a gleam of condescension, as if he already knew the chaos spreading on Olympus and the conflict looming. Zeus explained the situation, asking for Hades' help to face Kronos. But to Zeus's surprise, Hades was not particularly interested. He was a god who prized neutrality. The underworld, after all, didn't care about the wars of the gods. "Why should I intervene?" Hades asked with a cold smile. "What do I have to gain from this?" Zeus, impatient, tried to convince Hades that the collapse of Olympus would mean the ruin of the entire cosmos. If Kronos returns to power, the balance between life and death will be destroyed. Even the underworld will feel the consequences, he warned. Hades, however, knew that Zeus's words had their validity, but he also had his own plans. He was, after all, the god of intrigue and dark dealings. Hades reluctantly agreed to help, but in return, he demanded something unthinkable. Zeus would have to cede some of his power over Olympus at the end of the battle, granting Hades more influence in decisions about the fate of mortals. Zeus, now desperate, found himself with no choice and accepted the deal, even though he knew he might be plotting his own end. Upon returning to Olympus, Zeus found Hephaestus's gift, the golden throne of rare beauty. Hera, next to Hephaestus, smiled in a calculated way. "A gift to celebrate your strength and leadership in times of trial," she said softly, pretending to be at peace with her husband. Zeus, although suspicious, accepted the gift and with some relief sat on the throne. But as soon as he did, he felt something wrong. Invisible chains began to form around his arms and legs, and he realized too late that he had fallen into a trap. The Pantheon watched in shock as Zeus writhed, trying to break free. His eyes shone with fury, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't use his power. Hephaestus had designed the throne to contain even the power of the strongest gods. Hera and Hephaestus's betrayal was now clear, and Zeus roared with unrestrained fury, the entire Olympus trembling with his rage. "Do you dare betray the king of the gods?" he roared as his rays shone faintly around him, without the strength to do harm. Hera, with cold eyes, approached Zeus. "Your era is over," she said in a calm but firm tone. "Olympus needs a new leadership, someone who is not blinded by his own arrogance." Hephaestus, silent, watched from a distance, while Athena remained silent, still torn between loyalty to her father and the recognition that Olympus, under her rule, was falling apart. While Zeus struggled in vain against the invisible chains that bound him, a new catastrophe struck Olympus. The sky, once clear and full of soft clouds, began to darken. The air grew heavy, and a guttural rumble echoed through the divine mountains. From the abyss below Olympus, Kronos emerged, colossal and terrifying. His chains of Tartarus had been broken, and his body radiated a primal force that surpassed even the fury of Zeus. He came to seek his revenge, not just against Zeus, but against all of Olympus. The gods of Olympus panicked. Hephaestus's trap had worked perfectly, but now in the face of Kronos' return, the gods realized the fatal mistake they had made. They had incapacitated their greatest warrior at a time when they needed him most. Athena, ever wise, quickly realized what was at stake. "Free Zeus!" she shouted. "If Kronos destroys us, there will be no Olympus to rule." But Hera, still full of resentment, hesitated. She knew that freeing Zeus would mean losing her chance to take ultimate control of Olympus. Even so, Kronos' relentless advance made her rethink her position. The Titan charged forward with a rage that could not be contained, crushing mountains and shaking the very fabric of Olympus. Finally, seeing the impending doom, she gave the order for Hephaestus to free Zeus. With effort and agony, Zeus found himself free from the chains. His fury was now unmatched, not only against Kronos, but against Hera and the others who had betrayed him. But he knew that revenge against his traitors would have to wait. The fate of the world was at stake, and the battle against Kronos was the priority. The final war was about to begin. Kronos, the vengeful titan, against Zeus, the betrayed king of the gods, in a battle that would shake heaven and earth. Zeus's victory would not only secure the future of Olympus, but it would also set the course of his own leadership. Olympus trembled under the steps of Kronos. The Titan's every move resounded like distant thunder, and its colossal presence was a terrifying sight. From his body emanated a primitive energy, older than time itself. His eyes, filled with fury and vengeance, were fixed on the throne of Zeus, and the cruel smile that formed on his face revealed an ancient and dark desire to regain power and subdue those who had imprisoned him. Zeus, newly freed from the cursed throne, felt his strength gradually return. He looked around, the gods panicking, some paralyzed by fear, others preparing for battle. Hera, now silent, watched the scene with a mixture of regret and defiance. Her betrayal still weighed heavily in the air, but Zeus didn't have time to deal with it now. The Titan was advancing, and the only thing that mattered was to prevent the destruction of Olympus. "Get ready!" Zeus roared, his voice echoing through the celestial mountains. The gods, inspired by the renewed presence of their leader, joined him. Poseidon, wielding his trident, summoned the forces of the seas, while Athena, raising her spear, strategically led the other gods in forming a defense. Hades, coming from the depths of the underworld, brought with him an army of lost souls, creating a supernatural barrier around Olympus. It was a spectacle of power, the likes of which had never been seen before. Kronos, however, did not hesitate. With a single movement of his hand, he unleashed a wave of destruction that swept across Olympus like a storm of chaos. The surrounding hills exploded, the ground opened into deep cracks, and even the air seemed to bend to his will. Poseidon, with his seas, tried to stem the impact, but the waters were easily dispersed by the titanic fury. Athena, using her strategic intelligence, ordered precise attacks, but Kronos seemed impenetrable. "He's stronger than before," Zeus muttered to himself as lightning bolts formed in his hands. The heavens were filled with thunder, and Zeus's power began to manifest itself in all its intensity. But something was different. Kronos was no longer the Titan that Zeus had defeated in the last war. He had returned more powerful, more cunning, and above all, more determined. The first confrontation between Zeus and Kronos was devastating. Lightning slammed into the immortal flesh of Kronos, burning and lighting up the sky with blinding flashes. But unlike before, the Titan seemed to absorb some of the impact, as if it had learned to master the forces that had previously defeated it. He laughed, a deep, terrifying sound, and raised a gigantic hand, projecting a blow against Zeus that threw him back violently, crossing mountains and forests on Olympus. Zeus stood up with difficulty, but his determination was unwavering. Time was running out. As Zeus and Kronos faced each other, Olympus began to crumble. The cracks in the ground allowed shadowy creatures, forgotten in the far reaches of Tartarus, to begin to emerge. Colossal serpents, multi-headed beasts, and other ancient abominations arose to wreak havoc, attacking the lesser gods and wreaking havoc on the cities of mortals. The world was on the verge of a complete collapse. "We can't win like this," Athena muttered to herself, watching the battle from afar. She knew that brute force wouldn't be enough. Kronos was on a different level, and Olympus would not survive a protracted war. She ran to Hades, who watched the battle with an enigmatic gaze. "Hades, you know the secrets of Tartarus better than anyone," Athena said, her voice charged with urgency. "Is there any weakness, something we can use against Kronos?" Hades smiled, a sinister smile that revealed his delight in keeping dark secrets. "Kronos may be immortal, but Tartarus still marks him. He was shaped by the abyss, and the abyss is his weakness." Athena looked at him, confused. "Explain yourself," she demanded. "Tartarus is more than a prison," Hades replied. "It is a living entity, and its power still resides within Kronos. If we can connect it back to Tartarus, we can attach it again. But for that, we need a sacrifice." While Hades and Athena discussed this strategy, Zeus continued to fight desperately against Kronos. His lightning bolts seemed less effective with each blow, and he felt the weight of the battle beginning to take its toll. His strength was vast, but he knew he couldn't keep up that pace for long. Kronos, on the other hand, seemed to be feeding off the chaos around him, growing stronger by the second. It was then that Poseidon intervened. He summoned a huge wave of divine waters, forcing Cronus to retreat for a brief moment. Zeus took advantage of this distraction to get closer to Athena and Hades. "What have you discovered?" he asked urgently. Athena explained the plan quickly. Zeus hesitated for a moment. Binding Cronus back to Tartarus might work, but the sacrifice required was too great. Hades looked at him, emotionless. "Nothing in the universe comes without a cost, brother," Hades said calmly. "Either we sacrifice something now, or we lose everything." Zeus looked at Olympus, destroyed, and at the gods who were still fighting bravely. He knew that in order to save everything he had built, he would have to make a decision that would cost him dearly. With no time for further ado, he turned to Hades and Athena. "Let's do it." The plan was risky, but it was the only hope. Zeus, using the maximum power of his lightning bolts, needed to distract Cronus long enough for Hades and Athena to open a rift in the fabric of reality, connecting Olympus to Tartarus for a brief moment. Thus, Cronus would be sucked back into his eternal prison. But the sacrifice required was great. Zeus knew that by doing so, some of his own power could be consumed by Tartarus. And once the rift was opened, there would be a chance that Zeus would also be swallowed up by the abyss. The final battle has begun. Zeus concentrated every ounce of power left in his body and attacked Cronus with a lightning bolt so powerful that the heavens opened. Cronus, momentarily blinded by the attack, roared in fury, but this gave Hades and Athena the time they needed. Together they opened the rift into Tartarus, a deep, pulsating darkness filled with primordial energies. The air was sucked in. Cronus felt the power of Tartarus begin to pull him back. He fought with all his might, but his bond with the abyss was unbreakable. He screamed, trying to free himself, but the more he struggled, the stronger the tug became. Finally, with a last roar of despair, Cronus was dragged back into the depths of Tartarus, his form fading into the infinite darkness. Zeus, exhausted, fell to his knees, his strength drained almost completely. Olympus was saved, but the price had been high. Hades, silent, closed the rift of Tartarus, while Athena watched Zeus, worried. The king of the gods had won, but he was irreversibly changed. Peace had returned to Olympus, but the future was now uncertain. Zeus looked up to the sky, knowing that even though Cronus was imprisoned, new challenges would come. The reign of the gods had been shaken, and the scars of that battle would remain forever. The battle against Cronus was over, but the air on Olympus was still dense. The stillness that came after the chaos was almost suffocating. The lesser gods, who had survived the titanic fury, watched from afar, uncertain about the future. Zeus, exhausted and shaken, remained on his knees, panting, while the energy that surrounded him slowly diminished. He knew that something inside him had changed. The power that once seemed infinite now had a limit. The battle had taken its toll. Athena was the first to approach. His gaze mixed concern and respect, but also a silent understanding that things would never be the same again. "Dad, we won. But at what cost?" she whispered, her tone reflecting the gravity of the situation. Zeus, still catching his breath, slowly stood up. He looked at the surrounding ruins, at the wounded gods and the destroyed temples. It was true, Olympus was saved, but the realm of the gods was far from peaceful. Zeus turned to Hades, who, with an impenetrable expression, was watching calmly. The god of the underworld had fulfilled his end of the bargain, but there was more to discuss. Zeus knew that the promise made to Hades to give him more influence in the fate of mortals would have to be honored. It was a negotiation that Zeus had accepted in a moment of desperation, but now, free from immediate pressure, he understood the implications of what it would mean for the balance between the gods. "Hades," Zeus began, his voice still deep and heavy. "You got what you wanted. The underworld is safe, and Cronus has been defeated. But the influence on the fate of mortals? This is not a decision we can take lightly." Hades smiled darkly, the kind of smile that never revealed his true intentions. "Zeus, brother, don't worry. I do not wish to rule mortals as you do. The underworld is my kingdom, and I will not interfere with your bluntly. I just hope that when a soul's fate is decided, Olympus will remember that all roads lead, in the end, to me." Zeus did not immediately respond. He knew that Hades was not interested in the power to rule, but in control over the cycle of life and death. The balance between mortal life and the underworld was a delicate thing, and any change could have profound consequences. "Very well," Zeus finally replied, with little option but to accept the new balance that Hades hinted at. "But remember that the fate of mortals does not belong to us gods, but to the very fabric of the universe." As Zeus and Hades ended their conversation, Poseidon approached, still imposing but clearly battle-weary. "Brother, the sea has also suffered the consequences of this war." Cronus shook the balance of the waters. "There are storms that will not cease so easily." Poseidon had fought bravely, but he knew that the task of restoring order to the oceans would not be quick. "I'll need time," he continued. "Time and support to rebuild the balance that was lost." Zeus nodded. "Whatever it takes, Poseidon. Olympus cannot thrive if the seas are in chaos." Zeus knew that the balance of the universe was not only maintained by him, but by all the gods. Now more than ever, they would need to work together to repair the damage left by the war with Kronos. But Zeus' biggest concern was neither Hades nor Poseidon. It was Hera. From the beginning, his wife's betrayal had been an open wound. He knew he would need to confront her, not just as a wife, but as a goddess who had conspired against him at the most critical moment. As he turned his gaze to her, Zeus felt a mixture of anger and sadness. Hera watched him from afar, silent, but her eyes were full of defiance. Zeus walked towards him, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between them. "You plotted against me, Hera," he said, his voice low but loaded with tension. "You tried to dethrone me at a time when Olympus needed me the most. Why?" Hera, showing no fear, kept her gaze fixed on his. "I did what I did because I was fed up," she replied. "You have become blinded by power, Zeus. Blinded by your arrogance, by your adventures among mortals, and by your contempt for me and the other gods. Olympus was crumbling before Kronos even came back, and you didn't see it." Zeus remained silent for a moment, reflecting on Hera's words. He knew there was a painful truth in them. His reign, though powerful, had been marked by arrogance and aloofness. He had ignored the tensions on Olympus, believing that his absolute power was sufficient to maintain order. But now, all of that seemed fragile. "I messed up," Zeus finally admitted, his voice softer. "But that doesn't justify the betrayal, Hera. Instead of facing me as an equal, you conspired in the shadows. Now Olympus is more fractured than ever." Hera sighed, a rare moment of vulnerability. "And what do you suggest, Zeus? That I kneel down and ask for forgiveness? We both know that the problem goes beyond a simple reconciliation between us. Olympus needs more than a king. It needs a change." Zeus pondered for a long moment. She was right. Olympus could no longer be governed in the same way as before. Recent events had shown that brute force and divine tyranny were no longer enough to maintain balance. The time had come for a new era, an era in which the gods would need to work together to preserve peace, rather than submit to a single absolute ruler. Zeus' final decision was surprising, both for Hera and for the other gods. "Olympus will no longer be ruled by a single king," he declared. "From now on, we will form a council of gods. Each one of us will have a role, a responsibility. The big decisions will be made together, and no longer by one." The gods looked at each other, surprised but also relieved. This was an unprecedented change, but after everything that had happened, it was the only path that would make sense. The idea that power was shared among the gods offered new hope for the future. Hera, still suspicious, watched Zeus for a moment before speaking. "And you, Zeus? What role will it play in this new Olympus?" Zeus smiled, a tired but sincere smile. "I will be the guardian of balance, not the absolute ruler. The lightning bolt is still in my hands, but now it will serve the council. The era of the lone king is over. And so Olympus entered a new era, an era of cooperation between the gods. The battle against Kronos had left deep scars, but it also paved the way for a necessary change. Zeus, the god of lightning, was no longer the ultimate tyrant, but rather a wiser leader, aware that even the gods needed balance to thrive. From that day on, the Council of the Gods became the pillar of Olympus. Although there were still conflicts, major decisions were discussed, and each god played a key role in preserving the cosmos. Mortals, in turn, returned to praying to the gods, now seeing in them not only figures of power, but also of justice and balance. Zeus's legacy was secured not by force, but by the wisdom he had finally embraced. And so, Olympus bloomed again, as thunder, now controlled and guided by divine balance, echoed through the heavens, reminding the world that the gods were still present, not as tyrants, but as guardians of order.